How we got the Bible. It's been quite a journey. I don't know about you, but I packed some extra clothes for our journey there because we went around the world. We went back through history. We went through many languages. We went through some cultures, definitely some history lessons there along the way. And now it's time to kind of wrap it up. We're going to put a bow on this by summarizing the whole journey of how we got the Bible. I boiled it down to a 2-page outline here for you. So this is basically our previous 12 weeks in 2 pages. Everything you need to know in 200 words, I think, in outline form. And if somebody would engage you, where does Bible you follow come from? How do you know that's the Word of God? How do you know what it is? This is a guide for how we got what we have today. So that's why I want to provide this for you, kind of a summary in a package here that's easy to digest. And we're going to kind of go through that today and summarize it and wrap it up. And if there's any questions or anything on your mind that you want to make sure to get out of this before we leave, let's definitely do that today. Sound good? So let's start by understanding the Bible that we have is a collection of books. So what does the word Bible mean? What was the history of that word? Remember that? What's the history of that word Bible?
Books.
Books, yeah, it's Greek for books. Yeah, it's a transliteration of the Greek word biblios, which means books, so it's plural. So it's a collection of books. We took that Greek word over because the Bible we follow, we are Christians in this New Testament world, so our word that was revealed to us was written in Greek, so that Greek kind of came into our lexicon over the centuries. There's lots of words that came from the Greek that just came to our language, and the word Bible is one of them. So it just means books, basically. It's the books. It's a collection of ancient books written a long time ago. It's also important to understand. I mean, sometimes maybe in the Church of Christ we might struggle with some of these concepts, and we want to set ourselves apart. And I understand all that. But this is the Protestant Bible. That's what this is. That's the Bible we use. I haven't seen us using a different one. So this has a history. This Bible has a history. It came from somewhere. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, about the history of where we came from. This group right here, not the congregation, but the movement, the Church of Christ movement, came out of a Protestant movement. We use the Protestant Bible. So this is made up of 66 books, 39 from the Old Testament, 27 from the New Testament, and it was written over a period of about 1,600 years. So the last writing took place almost 2,000 years ago. It's about 1,900 years ago, the last writings that we have in our Bible. It originated about 3,500 years ago, somewhere around 1,500 BC. That's when Moses brought the Word of God into written form, because it came after a long period of oral tradition, of God speaking directly through His people, directly through the leaders of the family, or directly through the people that were to drive His will down. It was. I always thought, how did God speak to Jacob and Abraham? Did He hear it? Was it a thought? I don't know. When it says He spoke to them, remember that's a translated concept, right? But He spoke to them directly in some form. And then it got to the point where, hey, this needs to be captured, written down, because we're a nation now, right? You think about the Exodus from Egypt, that was a nation that marched out of there, right? 1 million strong. They were a lot of people there. But everything they had, that's had to be now written down to build a nation around. So about 3,500 years ago, Moses started to capture God's will in written form. And the language that was captured back then was Hebrew. That language is still there today, still a strong language today. In fact, our understanding, I don't know, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but Hebrew is pretty well preserved. The Hebrew of the Old Testament is the Hebrew of the nation of Israel today. And a lot of their official language is done in Hebrew. So Hebrew scholarship is high. We can look back at that and say we are really confident about what was meant and what was said. There's little debate about the Old Testament, about what was written down, what was captured, and what is preserved today. But the rest of the Bible has a couple other languages, primarily Greek, with a little bit of Aramaic mattered in there once in a while. We'll talk a bit more about that today. But 3 languages, written Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, which we are able to fully translate today without any problem. This isn't in Egyptian hieroglyphics or anything like that where we don't understand it. These are languages we can understand today and translate. So, the 66 books of the Protestant Bible. Now, this is really important to kind of get our heads around, kind of bring this in. Where did this thing come from? What are the origins of this Bible right here? Come on in. There you go. Here, I'm going to chase you down. Since you're a moving target. I'm going to hit you. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm pretty sprightly at 10 o'clock in the morning. So, where did this Protestant Bible come from? And I don't love that term, but I don't know of another term. You know, another one, I'm all ears. Because there are other Bibles. There's a Catholic Bible, there's a Greek Orthodox Bible, there are other compilations that call themselves the Bible. So we kind of got to narrow it down a little bit, right? This Bible is shared by a lot in the non-Catholic, non-Greek Orthodox world. Okay, so we're just going to call it the Protestant Bible. The 66 books of the Protestant Bible was established as a result of something called the 39 Articles of the Church of England. And this was an ongoing series of meetings and strategic planning that happened from about 1536 to 1570. This all comes on the heels of King Henry VIII of England getting excommunicated from the Catholic Church. That's what happened. He got kicked out because he basically said, I'm the head of the church here. Oh yeah, we'll see about that. Boom. So he's out. He's like, well, I make my own church. And so it kind of started out, what's really looked at as the English Reformation happened there in that mid-1500 time frame. There was a big struggle there. I encourage you to go Google that, read about it. It's a very fascinating piece of our history. It brought us to where we are right now as a church, as a nation, as people. I mean, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be standing here right now. I mean, it was a major event in our history. Okay, so this Church of England's formed, and so there was a tumultuous period of time there where they were trying to figure out what we're going to do. Remember, you got a bunch of priests and bishops and cardinals, whatever they were, that were Catholic. They were not sure I want to do this, but what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they eventually settled. By the time Queen Elizabeth I comes along, on the Church of England, we're okay. It's over. Enough. We're going to be this. We settle down, and we say, well, what are we? What is our doctrine? What Bible are we going to use? What was the official Bible at that time? What was the official Bible at that time? The Latin Vulgate. Exactly right. So it's like, well, we're going to use that Bible? Are we going to be in English? Are we going to have those books? Well, if you study Latin Vulgate, there's a lot of books here that aren't in our Bible. So there was a big discussion that happened here during that period of time to settle down and say, what are we going to do? If we're going to be a church, who are we going to be? Our elders do that all the time, right? Who are we? Let's make sure who we are. We talk about that. We define boundaries, right? That's what this was. And so out of that came the establishment of the 66 books that are in the Bible of the Church of England. And that became the Protestant Bible that we have today. And it went through a lot of translation efforts over the years. But that locked it in. You want to know where these 66 books came from? That's it. Go out and Google the 39 articles. It's very interesting. I want to share a couple. Did I put a couple? Yeah, a couple of very interesting ones here. It's 39 of them, so I'm not going to go through all those. But a couple of interesting ones that speak to this Bible. Number one is Article 6, sufficiency of the Holy Scriptures for salvation. They came to that conclusion. This is all you need. Is that how do we think that, George? Oh, yeah. Is there anything else? You don't have a pamphlet for us? You don't have a handout? You don't have a prayer, I have to say? This is it. I mean, if you think about it, where do we get that from? Who established that? These guys did. And we agree with that, right? We agree. So that's a very interesting thing. And I think you asked a question about a few weeks ago. What's the difference in the canon? That's it. If you don't agree with that, well, it's just a bunch of stuff. Because there's a whole lot of other stuff, right? But if you say, this is it, then this becomes pretty important to make sure what's in here is right? So I mean, that's a very interesting, powerful article. Number 7, the Old and New Testament are not at odds with each other. Have you ever heard Christians struggle with that? I've seen Christians struggle with that. Well, wait a minute. Is there a contradiction here? So a lot builds off that. You can have a whole class around that. You can have a 13-week study on that concept right there, how the Old and New Testament harmonize. This story that goes through, right? This is an ongoing theme of man being redeemed. right? They're not at odds with each other. I look at it like the Old Testament, we were a bunch of little toddlers and preschoolers running around causing trouble, making a mess. And the New Testament is we're grown-ups being treated with respect by our Father, right? That's how I kind of view it. So it's not at odds, it's the story of mankind growing and moving through this journey in time. So that's a very interesting concept. And when you think about that, you start to understand the genesis of the Bible, because that's was underpinning concepts of these guys back then. Yes, ma'am?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
So the Church of England was started by the King of England,
Yeah.
but did he then request or require priests that were no longer Catholic to help do this, or what? I just want to kind of basically know.
How did that unfold?
Yeah.
That's a whole class on
Or
itself.
do you not know?
There was some volunteering and there was some coercion.
Okay.
You know,
I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
So was it priests and priests that went away from the Catholic Church that kind of got together
Yeah, I mean,
that he chose, or?
yeah, the whole country wrestled, the whole
Yeah, it
religious
was kind of a
leadership
giant
wrestled
mess.
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, where's this going to be? And there were a lot of,
I was just curious.
gnashing of teeth and tearing of robes, I'm sure, over that, right?
Okay.
Because it was
So
tough.
it was a little bit of everything that he kind of pushed
Yeah.
together to get the.
Right, so what happened? King Henry VIII, he gets excommunicated. This is the 30-second Cliff Notes version. Henry VIII gets excommunicated.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to kick me out? Well,
It's his wife's, yep,
he gets excommunicated because he says, I'm the head of the church.
right.
Okay, not you, I am, right? That gets him kicked out. So he says, okay, I'm going to go start my own, because they didn't like his marriage thing. That's right.
Right.
He said, well, I'm my own boss. He said, well, you're not. Wait a second. Gets kicked out. So he says, all right, I'm going to start my own church. Gets all this. Remember, he's just announcing this. He dies. His son comes in, tries to do it. He dies. Queen Mary comes in, his daughter. She's like, no, we're Catholic. We're going back to be Catholic.
Right.
All right, yeah, great. Stop all that. We're going back to be Catholic. She dies without an heir. Elizabeth I comes in. She has to make this decision. What am I going to do?
Gotcha.
And she says, we're going the way Henry wanted to go. And so
And then she just basically.
she stuck it out. Then she fought a couple wars over that.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember the Spanish Armada?
Yeah.
That was coming to take her head. Yeah, so they fought a couple wars over that.
Yeah, and the Scottish.
So there's a whole, it's a whole history there around, is this going to happen? So when it's all said and done, was it voluntary? No.
Gotcha.
Were there some people who went along? Yeah.
Well, it's just kind of odd that all that happened, but God still used that mess to
Right.
get us.
It got us this.
Which is
Right.
awesome,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And
About
that,
it.
yeah, I mean, that's what I said. Do bad things have a reason? Well, got us harmony in some respect, right? And so yeah, the whole history there. But these articles kind of underpin this supremacy of the word, and that's really where that's the foundation for this thing to be settled on. These books to be settled on. Thank you for that question. Very good. Yes, sir.
Another question. Just a Cliff Notes version. I know it's not fast. I'm just curious.
Uh-huh.
Like, how long? Like, do you know what the committee that established all this? How many people were on it? Was there consensus, or was there a whole lot of disagreement? How long did it take for them to establish these 66 books?
It took 34 years.
34
I bet
years.
there was some argument. This wasn't, hey, let's get together for tea and crumpets down at the Westminster and make some. No, this was for 34 years. I'm sure anybody in leadership in 1536 wasn't still in their seat in 1570s. This was children, this was a generational spanning, so I'm sure that was not a peaceful. There was lots of powdered wigs being pounded.
Any idea what the criteria was that they were holding up to?
That's a whole stand.
Yeah,
so
okay, that's fine. Okay, that's that.
But it was establishing the doctrine of the church. Establishing the doctrine of the church. That's it. So great questions. But understand, this was establishing the Protestant doctrine. Now, just real quick, we do have to take one small detour. Anybody ever studied the Restoration? The movement within which the Church of Christ came out of?
I actually have.
Yes.
But it's been a
Definitely
long time
worth-
ago.
Definitely worth a Google, at least, or buy a book, because there was no Church of Christ in 1530 and in 1066. That came out of a Protestant movement to restore, right? Just like the Reformation, the actual Reformation movement in Europe came out of a centuries-long displeasure with where the church had gone to say, let's reform it. Let's get away from this path. Let's get back and reform. But same thing with the Restoration. The Restoration was, hey, whoa, hang on. We've gotten so far off from what this thing says that We need to restore. That came out of a Protestant movement. It came out of Presbyterians and Methodists and Baptists in the hills of Kentucky and Tennessee. And that's where that came out of, right? It's a restoration. It came out of a Protestant movement, okay? So that's why this is an important, it's our history. It's where we came from. Our forefathers in the church woke up one day and went, we're not even doing anything close to what this says. We got to get back. Who were those people? They were Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, right? That's a Lutheran maybe, but it was primarily a Protestant movement. Okay, so it's just really, that's why this is so important to us. So the Old Testament, what is it? Well, it contains 5 books of the law, 39 books in total, written over a period of about 1,100 years, from about 1500 BC to about 400 BC. Contains 5 books of the law. We call that the Pentateuch. Also contains poetry, prophecy, and history. Written mostly in Hebrew with a smattering of Aramaic. Was organized into the collection of books we know today around 400 BC. So, again, if anybody ever challenged you, say, look, this was a nation from 1500 up till somewhere around 500 BC, got taken off into captivity. The remnant came back around 400, 420 BC, somewhere around there, and said, okay, we're a nation again. Let's get our history, let's get all of the word, all the prophecy, everything we've known about our Father together. That happened around 400 BC. They started to really collect it into what their Bible is today. That effort about 400 BC still stays today, 2,500 years later. Okay? So that's where the Old Testament comes from. The Hebrew canon was established twice. One by the Great Assembly. Now, the Great Assembly, remember we talked a little bit about the Maccabees a few weeks ago, where the Hebrews kind of pushed off Seleucid, which was Egyptian essentially, oppression, established their own nation again. So this Great Assembly was kind of religious leadership of the day. Somewhere around 100, 120 BC, they established their canon again. They said, okay, it's been a few hundred years. Let's make sure it's locked down. A lot went on. We just went through a couple of wars, a few hundred years. Let's lock it in again. Let's make sure our history, our canon, our Bible is intact. That happened around 120 BC. And then they did it again about 70 AD. Because what happened between 120 and 70 AD? What happened? 120 BC, 70 AD. What happened in there? Rome came in, but more important than that, Larry.
Oh, Jesus.
Jesus came around. Jesus came along, flipped the world upside down, sent these apostles and disciples out there to cause all kinds of trouble. About 70 AD, they went, hey, let's lock it down again. And what they did there is they said, the couple things came out of that Council of Geneva in 70 AD. Did I write it on here? It's in your outline. A couple things happened. They locked their canon down. They also, you know what they did? They said anybody who accepts Jesus as a Messiah cannot be partakers in the synagogue, basically. So they did a couple things there. You see what happened? I mean, think about that. You've got all these people that are saying, well, the Messiah's here. The Messiah came. You killed him 40 years ago. Right? And they went, well, okay, anybody who does that, anybody who's thinking that, anybody who accepts that, can't commune with us. So that was they basically said, we're not going that way. We're going to keep going this way. So the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew thought, went on its path about 70 AD away from the New Testament path. Okay? So those two things are very, very important. We talked about the Masoretic method, the Masoretic text. The Masoretic tradition was their way of ensuring that the text was whole and pure and undefiled, and every letter is captured. We talked about that. And that was proven correct when in 1948, in some caves above the Dead Sea, they found hundreds of scrolls that dated back to about 200 BC that were exactly right. So here you go, 2,200 years later, we dig up some scrolls that are exactly correct from what we had in 1948. I mean, that's pretty cool. All these this Bible right here, it dates back to the King James, which was translated in 1611. It's exactly the same. The Hebrew this was translated out of, and those clay jars in those caves, 2,000-year-old cave scrolls are exactly right. So that's the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It validated the oldest part of the Bible is still correct and intact. Don't underappreciate that. About it. And who said things happen at the right time? There's something happening at exactly the right time, right? Oldest Hebrew manuscripts date back to about the 9th century. And why do we say we don't really have any older Hebrew manuscripts, except for the Dead Sea Scrolls? Older than that. Why is that? Remember what the reason was? Why don't we have 2,000-year-old, 3,000-year-old Hebrew manuscripts?
Were there that many to begin with?
Well, there were a lot.
They would
deteriorate. They would deteriorate. But also, they had a tradition that if the Bible got destroyed. I was looking around here. I found a Bible that looked like it had been underwater. I mean, the thing was completely like shriveled up. And I'm like, what am I going to do with that? I don't feel respectful keeping that Bible. I feel like this needs to be disposed of. I just feel that. I took it. I said out there, I'm talking to the elders. What do you want to do with this? Because you can't give this to anybody. It's completely water. You know, I'm like, somebody spilled a bottle of water on it, probably. Their whole tradition was, something happens to this, page get torn out, ceremonially burn it and bury it. So as a result of that, because it's made about with fragile things, the oldest stuff we have goes back to about the 800s. So, but the Dead Sea Scrolls validate that it's correct. They did a good job. They did a great job preserving it all those centuries. What are your thoughts about that? Any thoughts?
Well, I have a question on what you've already said. What did the elders do with the Bible?
I just said that. I just found it this morning. Yeah, okay. What do you want to do with it? I mean, that's a good question. I don't think there's anything in the scriptures that tells us what to do with the word when it gets worn out. Right? What do you want to do with it? You going to throw it in a garbage can?
I got several Bibles on my shelf that that are falling apart, but I'm not going to throw them in the trash.
Not going to throw them in the trash. So what do you do? Because it doesn't belong in the trash.
Maybe one day I'll have a ceremony in the backyard.
Open a pit, burn it, bury it. I don't know. I mean, but I got to feel like I did something with it.
Yeah.
It's like we do with somebody who dies. We are respectful with the body, right? It's like, yeah, we're respectful with the word. So anyway, something to think about. I'm getting to that point. I showed you my Bible I got when I was baptized 45 years ago. And that thing's going to have to be disposed of eventually. I don't know what to do with it.
Buried with you.
Buried with me, yeah, that's it. That's a good one, thank you.
They'll find it in 1,000 years.
Say that again? Sorry?
I was joking. You're gonna bury. They'll find it in 1,000 years.
Find it in 1,000 years, yeah. It'll outlast me, I'm sure. So the Old Testament of our Bible is an exact translation of the Hebrew. So, thoughts, questions about that?
Well, Jesus at the end in Revelation 22 says, no, don't change your word.
Mm-hmm.
Not until we change. It's amazing how the Jews took that
Yeah.
and ran with it. Not from him, but how they took God's word and how they elevated it.
Shouldn't be very respectful when we translate? Are you changing something to fit your take? Or are you delivering what was said to this new reader? Yeah. The New Testament. Earliest existing manuscripts date back to about the 2nd century. Written in Greek with some occasional quotes in Aramaic. 27 books written from about 50 to 100 AD. The 3 most important manuscripts are the most complete, the most accurate, the oldest date to about the 3rd century. It's about 5,300 Greek manuscripts today in various states of completeness and accuracy and different books. They take different sections of the New Testament. Those big 3 we talk about are the big 3 because they're the biggest span. They cover the most of the New Testament. Whereas we have lots and lots. There might be a book, there might be a section of a book, might be a couple books, maybe the Gospels. We have lots and lots and lots of those. The act of canonizing, we said canonizing is the act of measuring it up, making sure it's good, making sure it's right. We talk about this, right? I mean, Jim says, when he opens up the Bible, he goes to John and looks for a passage of John. That's how he measures up the Bible, right? I completely agree with that. I go to Acts 2:38, I go to places like that. First thing I go, what's Acts 2:38 saying? Did you mess with Acts 2:38? If you mess with Acts 2:38, I got no use for you, right? That's my first measure, right? So the act of measuring it up started in the 2nd century by just keeping lists of what all's out there. What all books are out there floating around, what am I missing? This stuff looks good, we're not sure about that. And it started to happen fairly early. And then that canon process in the Christian world was kind of settled by about 364, because what happened in 364? For a Texas gift card, Texas Roadhouse gift card,
Council of Trent.
No, that's a good guess though, but you're off by about 1,000 years. That's okay. The Latin Vulgate is translated.
Yeah.
When the Latin Vulgate's translated, that's what it said. That was kind of like, these are the books we're going to go with. Now, there were some extra books in there, but that was kind of, that canon effort was pretty solid there for about 1,000 years. There were the Council of Trent, and there were some other meetings that took place to kind of reaffirm the canon or maybe set some things aside as apocryphal. But around 364 was when you started to have some settling in to what the New Testament was going to be, the Bible was going to be. And then the existing copies we have today were made from originals or copies of originals. So that's the New Testament. So obviously much newer. The writing's much newer, but the writing took place over a more compressed period of time. It took place over about a 50-year period of time versus an 1,100-year period of time for the Old Testament. So we said these books were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. Anybody speak Aramaic in here? Any Aramaic? Conversations at dinner over Greek? Mike, sitting down, chatting in Greek over dinner? No omegas and sigmas? That's all I. It's in Greek I know. It's a little bit of calculus I took. There's omega, sigma, delta, lambda, alpha, omega. But we don't speak that, right? So what do we have to do, folks? We've got to translate it. So the Septuagint, we had talked a lot about that, was a Greek version of the Hebrew Bible. That was the first effort to get the Hebrew Bible translated into something that modern non-Hebrews could use. And that was around 200 BC-ish, somewhere around there. There were now a lot of things got translated. Remember we said King Ptolemy wanted all this Hebrew literature translated. He looked at it like literature. He's like, hey, this thing's important. I hear a lot about this. Come down and translate that for me. And bring all your other stuff too. So they brought down the things we consider the Apocrypha, some poetry, all kinds of stuff. Translate everything. Translate both versions of Daniel. Translate both versions of Ezra, translate both versions of Esther, translate everything. And everything in the Greek. Because he wanted all over literature translated. So that was the first effort to do that, translated into Greek, and we said that Bible was the Greek Hebrew Bible in the time of Jesus. So Matthew especially does a lot of quoting from the Old Testament. If you think about, have you ever done a study of the harmony of the Gospels, study like why the Gospels were written, who they're written to, that type of thing? Matthew was written to who? Jews. Yeah. So as a result of that, you get a lot of Old Testament quotes. Lots and lots and lots of them. Well, he wrote in Greek. What was the Greek Bible at the time? The Septuagint. So most of the quotes that you get, especially Jesus quoting the Old Testament, are Septuagint language. So that's very important, right? It's very important for us. He used that. The translation's already done. Take that translation. It's kind of cool. So first translations were only individual books or portions of the Bible, but the entire Old Testament, New Testament were eventually translated in the Latin Vulgate around 364 by Jerome. Got to remember that date, that person, that event. That was an important event. That gave you the King James. It really did. It gave you the King James. If you're a King James reader, the Latin Vulgate was the basis for it. And that happened in 364. So very important to understand that. It became the official Bible of much of the Christian world for over 1,200 years. And it gave us much of the structure and foundation for the Bible we have today. It put the book order in place, Gospels, segmentation, chapter and verse, all came out of that. Right? Somebody later on went, hey, wait, it's hard to find stuff. Let's break something chapter and verse. That all came out of Latin Vulgate. All that structure came out of Latin Vulgate. So you cannot lose appreciation for that. And it's still the official Bible of the Catholic Church today. English translations. They took off about the 14th century. We talked about that earlier. Why? Why translate in English? Because they had the Church of England. They speak English. Let's get this thing in English for us. But remember, just your question, was there harmony? People got burned and got their heads cut off for translating the Bible. You think there was an ease of not being this church, being that church? You think that went easy? That did not go easy, right? So this is even after the Church of England, or during the whole Church of England transition, you had some of these guys get run out of the country for translating in English. So there was a pretty big, upheaval there. One of the first main ones was John Wycliffe, 1382. This is really before the Church of England. What he did was he took the Latin Vulgate and translated it. that didn't cause a whole lot of trouble because they were still Catholic. If you think about it, this is a couple hundred years before Henry VIII. It's 150 years before. So it's basically saying, yeah, I'm going to translate something here that we can read in church. I'm just taking your same Bible and just translating it so we can read it. Didn't cause a whole lot of trouble, although a movement came out of that. Imagine now, you're hearing the Bible in your language. You can read it in your language. What starts to come out of that?
They know that priests are not telling the truth.
Yeah. What happens if I'm just hypothetically.
Doctrine versus what's in the Bible.
Yeah, hypothetically, say we're practicing a thing where we only take communion once a year. Hypothetically. Because our elders told us to take communion once a year, that's what the Bible says to do. It says take it once a year. And I get a Bible that I can read in my language, and I open it up and I say, I don't see anything in here about taking communion once a year. In fact, it looks like to me we should take it every Lord's Day. Because I can read this now. Imagine the trouble that starts. So that's where that trouble came from. Remember the Lollards, talk about the Lollards, right? So it wasn't a translating effort at that point. It was, whoa, wait a minute. You're going to start a movement here. And what happened a couple of years later? You have Reform in Europe and in England. You're going to have a Reformation movement happening as a result of that translation. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my family's from Germany, and I was born there. My uncle was a Catholic altar boy, and in school you had to learn Latin. Most of the people only took a few years, so you didn't know it. And the priest back then still spoke in Latin. He was Catholic, and he would say to his parents, when the priest forgot what they were supposed to say, they would just throw words in that they knew. And he said, if you knew Latin, you knew the priests weren't doing their jobs because they had forgotten their soliloquy or whatever they were supposed to say. Well, that I'm sure was happening during that time too.
Probably right. I mean, I'm sure I doesn't doubt. I've heard that story before.
Something like
I don't doubt that. Yeah.
Actually knew what they were saying.
Yeah, that's right.
It caught them in, not telling truth.
There's a whole lot of trouble can be started when people can read it for themselves.
Know the language, or you know it in your language.
Right, exactly right. And so when Luther tried, he did it in German, and a couple of years later. So and then Tyndale comes along. Remember, he's the guy that he caused a lot of trouble because he not only translated the Bible, he went back and did some Greek and Hebrew. Remember that translating from Latin Vulgate. Okay, I'm translating from someone's work that's already been done. I'm going to look at that and say, I don't know if that's correct. Let me go back to the Greek and see what the Greek says. You start messing with it. It was one thing to translate it, which we just talked about, the trouble. When you go messing with it and changing what it says a little bit, wow, that's a bridge too far. Your head's got to come off. That's where that basically came from. When you start to change it, right, based on that Greek and that Hebrew. So that's why he got in so much trouble. But his translation gave us much of the phrasing that we have today. The King James, the American Standard, the ESV, the RSV. We'll show you got the tree here. You see that tree there? It starts with Tyndale.
I have the Tyndale Bible, and it reads a lot like the King
James. Yeah.
King
James.
Not that very.
Yeah. So this guy was put to death, but why do bad things happen? We got an entire centuries movement of Bible from that. Remember we said if you go splat. That's what happened. It went everywhere. So his effort was huge. I would definitely remember Tyndale put a circle around his name. He gave his life to get this thing correct, the best he could at that time. He did a wonderful job. I respect that. His work was a basis for many future translations. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And so after his death, things got like, okay, now the church starts to settle in a little bit in England. So now you start to get this movement that, hey, let's have an official English Bible. And they gave birth to the Matthew's Bible, the Great Bible. They were official attempts at English translation. And then the Geneva Bible came along, which was more of like, that was printed in mainland Europe, interesting enough, in English, printed in Geneva. The people who were fleeing the religious institutions of the day took the Geneva Bible with them. So you see, you had this like, I have my Bible, your Bible, this is the one, the official one, that's your, the renegade, but yet all these people argue over which Bible. And if people get on a wooden boat and sail 3,000 miles to get away from that, that's that movement, guys. I would ask us to have a lot of respect for people that wanted to get away from their religious situation bad enough They got themselves in a crickety wooden boat and ate shoe leather for 2 months and went off into nowhere, had no idea what was going to happen, but it's better than staying here. I've thought about those people many, many times. That those people, we've lost, where's that, man? Can we get that back? Because that's something else. They took the Geneva Bible with them. They said, we're going over the Bible, we're going. We're out of here. So that brought about this concept of, okay, guys, let's have harmony now. Let's kind of settle on, we're one church, let's settle on a Bible. And so that's where the King James came in. That was the first version to be officially recognized. And that was their goal. Remember, their goal was not a new translation. It was to have a Bible that we could all live with. And one of the reasons why they couldn't live with it was the commentary. If you look at these Matthew Bibles, and probably even Tyndale are the same thing. Great Bible, Matthew's Bible, Geneva Bible, they all had commentaries in them. It was, yeah, it says it, but here's what it means. And people just had enough of that. It was like, quit telling me, just give me the scripture. And so the King James was the first official attempt to do that and to have harmony, and it worked. And that was the foundation for many more translations to come. And it carried that Tyndale phrasing all the way through. So thoughts, comments so far? We are hauling down the highway here. Any thoughts?
I just think that we put our faith, our lives, into a translation that was translated by non-Christians.
What do you mean?
But not, as far as we know, baptized believers.
Oh.
And we still fight which version is the one we should use.
One of the articles talks about baptism, right? So it's like, okay, so they had emphasis on baptism, definite emphasis on baptism. Now, let's discuss what kind of baptism we're talking about, right? So, but now that's where you are with that conversation, right? But the Church of England definitely had baptism as preeminent. We definitely did. Now, I don't know what that was.
If you listen to the creeds, you'll see that was in there.
Yeah. So I'm not prepared to say that. All I'm prepared to say is, these guys and gals were doing the best they could to translate the Word of God.
God uses whoever He wants to use to
Exactly.
get what He wants.
Exactly. They were
Even-
Christians.
Even the evil people. Even the evil people.
Yeah, the Romans were pretty bad. They built some good
Yeah.
roads.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to use what you
Which
can.
brought Christianity
Right.
throughout the world.
Right.
Without the Roman roads, it wouldn't be possible.
Exactly. Exactly. So there we have the King James Bible, the Bible that really provides the foundation. And as a result of that, there were some things left out. You'll hear terms, the Apocrypha. I want you to make sure you understand what that means. It means hidden or secretive. So books that are left out of the Bible that we use, we call the Apocrypha. I don't know if the Catholics call that the Apocrypha. It's in their Bible. Okay? We call it the Apocrypha. That's what we're referring to. The Protestant world is what we're referring to. Books left out of the Protestant Bible. Might be in some others, though. The most important ones come during that intertestamental period between the Old and New Testament, or after the New Testament writings. They come later. So they generally come to those two time frames. It's kind of funny that we don't have any. You do have a couple. You've got the expanded Ezra, Daniel, and Esther. Those are three exceptions. But other than that, we don't have like a third Chronicles. We don't have a sixth version of the Pentateuch that got left out. We don't have that. What we have are expanded versions of existing books. And actually, the whole Great Assembly wrestled with that. They knew about these. They were there. Okay, go and look it up. It's very interesting. They wrestled with that during a period of time. They were trying to lock it in. They said, okay, this expanded stuff, no, we're going to stay with the concise version that we've always had. So that happened during that intertestamental period there. And then you have the tree that's in your outline here. I think it's very helpful. I highly recommend you hang on to that. It gives you kind of a good idea. Again, this is the work of Lightfoot. This came out of his book. There are some there's always modern versions, revisions coming out, but this gives you a great image of the important ones that we know and we use, and it kind of shows where they came from and their origins. But the main theme is all of that. The Bible continues to be revised today, continues to be translated today, continues to be printed today, continues to be used and alive, and it is the most produced and most read book in the history of mankind. Yeah, and that's the journey. Thoughts, comments, wrap us up. Helpful? Get some idea where it came from? What you're using? You know, there's some ugly things back there, right? It's human beings at the end of the day, right? You'll get your heart broke if you put your faith in people too long, right? And so there's some ugly things, but some good things. You can see God working through that. You can see miracles happen. You can see godless people produce things we could use. You see godly men doing their best. You see all this kind of stuff happening during a whole period of time. And as a result, we have a Bible preserved for us today that we have pretty good confidence that is the Word of God and it hasn't been messed with. And if you don't like this one, if you feel uncomfortable about this, there's probably 20 other translations that you can compare and feel good about. Yes, sir.
I was just in the comments, remember what that gentleman said, there's, I think most Christians, we think about the level of faith we have to believe in God's existence, and we talk about faith and we usually think about that, but this adds a whole nother layer of faith. You have faith that the Word is still intact after all these years, because there's a lot of stuff on that slide that, if God wasn't involved, it could be like that game telephone, it could be all messed up after so many thousand years.
Yeah, it's true. And I think there's probably a lot of hidden ones going up all the direction that became dead ends, right? I mean, this is the one that brought us to where we are. But how many paths did we not choose, or that other people went down? There's a lot of faith. I mean, every time we think about, well, I have faith that our minister is going to bring a godly message from the Word today. I just going to trust him to do that, right? And I listen and I do my best. And every once in a while, wherever I'm at, I'll go, good point, but I'm not sure about that. It's okay. It's people doing their best. I hope. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I was reading about some articles about history books from the past and future and put together. And if you take all the Bible and say it's just history, nothing else, and you take the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then between books, there are over 63,000, I think 63,700 cross-references between all the books in the Bible. They said no history book can even do that. It's impossible to get that many cross-references with the amount of information that's in the Bible.
Love that. That's worth a million bucks. I wish we had time to do that, to go into the different, where the Bible validates itself.
Yeah, it validates
itself 63,000 times.
3,700 times or more.
Yeah.
And they said there's no book that has ever been written that can do that.
Yeah.
They said, how does that not prove a superior being?
Right.
If
too
people
complex.
don't want to believe in God.
Yeah. And it wasn't like one guy sat down and cross-referenced himself 63,000 times. These are how many authors over this span of time? Not collaborating together.
No.
Did it. There's got to be something guiding him. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Thank you for being such a great bunch to work with. Mike's starting up next week with A Closer Walk with God, so I'm looking forward to that.